Today, we're going to talk about autonomic pharmacology. We are going to divide autonomic pharmacology into 4 categories. Drugs that increase the sympathetic nervous system response, drugs that increase the parasympathetic nervous system response, drugs that block the sympathetic nervous system response, and drugs that block the parasympathetic nervous system response. Increase sympathetics, increase parasympathetics. Block sympathetics, block parasympathetics. If you can divide everything into these 4 categories, well, you'll be doing a lot better than most people who take a pharmacology class. Well, if you haven't heard of the sympathetic nervous system, it's the adrenaline rush system, the fight and flight system. So he will be my icon of the sympathetic nervous system, the adrenaline rush, the automatic nervous system response to fear, anger, and stress. Well, the sympathetic nervous system is exactly the opposite of this, the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is considered the rest and digest system. And so this gentleman right here is my icon of the parasympathetic nervous system response. We're going to divide autonomic pharmacology into these 4 categories. Drugs that increase the sympathetic nervous system response, we'll refer to them as sympathetic agonists. We will have drugs that are parasympathetic agonists, and they're going to increase this response right here. That's why the green line is around that, to show that parasympathetic agonists increase this rest and digest response. Well, we'll have sympathetic antagonists that block this system, and so it'll be denoted by a red circle with a line through it. Sympathetic antagonists are going to block this sympathetic nervous system response. And we're going to have parasympathetic antagonists that block this parasympathetic nervous system response. Something that's very confusing for people is that you will notice that these two have similar effects. We can use a sympathetic agonist like epinephrine to speed heart rate up. The parasympathetic nervous system slows the heart rate down, and so if we block that, it's going to speed up heart rate too. So atropine increases heart rate. It's a parasympathetic blocker, an anticholinergic. Epinephrine speeds up heart rate as well because it's a sympathetic agonist. So you'll notice that the sympathetic agonists and the parasympathetic antagonists have very similar effects, as do the parasympathetic agonists, the cholinergic drugs, and the sympathetic antagonists, the sympatholytics. So even though these drug classes, the 4 drug classes, are going to have all sorts of drugs, all sorts of drug names, all sorts of indications, what I want you guys to be able to do is take a step back and see what all the sympathetic agonists have in common. What do the parasympathetic agonists have in common? What do the sympathetic antagonists have in common? And what do the parasympathetic antagonists all have in common? Drugs that increase the sympathetic nervous system response are called sympathomimetics, meaning to mimic, imitate, or increase the sympathetic nervous system response. Drugs that increase the parasympathetic nervous system response are referred to as cholinergic drugs because the system uses acetylcholine. They'll also be called parasympathomimetic, meaning to mimic, imitate, or increase the parasympathetic nervous system response. Drugs that decrease the sympathetic nervous system response will be called sympatholytics. And we'll talk about the sympatholytics when we talk about antihypertensive agents next time when we talk about high blood pressure. Drugs that decrease the parasympathetic nervous system response will also be referred to as parasympatholytic. We'll call these anticholinergic drugs because the parasympathetic nervous system uses acetylcholine. Anything that blocks that system will be called anticholinergic or parasympatholytic. Lots of names that all mean exactly the same thing. We're going to divide the autonomic nervous system into 2 systems. The sympathetic system, which is the adrenaline rush system. The opposite system is the parasympathetic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is automatic. You do not control your autonomic nervous system. It works automatically. So when you get frightened, your heart rate goes up. You don't really have a lot of control over that at all. The autonomic nervous system controls the function of many organs automatically. That's why many drugs that affect the autonomic nervous system affect many organs. The heart, blood vessels, bowels, pancreas, the ureters, the bladder, the eyes, the pupils, the lacrimal glands, salivary glands, and lung airways. So I wanted to make this very, very clear. The most important thing you can remember is drugs that affect the autonomic nervous system will affect many different organs all at the same time.